Hi, and welcome to Cambridge High School. My name is Keith Schneider, the principal of the high school, and I'm sitting with Mike Klingbeil, our athletic director, and we're trying something new. We're going to go over our activity code in depth with you electronically instead of face-to-face, and we find this to be probably more convenient for our families. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Mr. Klingbeil and to go over the highlights and some of the small minor revisions.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. The purpose of this video is to go over our activity code, which serves a variety of purposes and has a variety of information. The first thing that's really the most important is that our activity code outlines the policies and procedures that allow a student and a student athlete to participate in many of our athletic and activity programs. So this document is going to outline all of those guidelines and rules per se that would affect a student athlete, both in terms of their eligibility, but also the opportunities that they may have. So we look at a couple of things first. We always want to reference our activity code as a privilege rather than a right, and so student athletes need to make sure that they represent our school in a positive manner, and that's important because they're generally the face of the things that are going on, many positive things that are going on in our school and our community. We also want to make sure that these student athletes are aware of the privileges that go with being a student athlete, and that they have a variety of opportunities and a variety of appearances and contests and places where they're going to be seen and represent our school. The code itself, there's really four important parts. The first one is to promote health and well-being of all student participants. The second one is to establish a standard of conduct that's fair and equitable to all, and then also provide an outline of consequences should a student athlete not meet the requirements set forth by the activity code. And then finally, the remediation part, which is to have a student athlete that may incur an activity code violation get help and get help that they need, so that way they don't repeat the mistakes and we're able to enjoy the opportunities that our school district offers.
And just to piggyback off that, this code, when there are major revisions to the code, we bring together all the stakeholders to have a discussion about that and to come agreement on those. We only have two minor additions to the code, but it is a code developed by parents, students, athletes, coaches, and we feel that it does reflect best upon our district when we do that.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. A couple of things we have to be aware of. First is that there's really going to be two categories of rules. We have our WIAA rules, which regulates all of the athletic programs in the state, and we also have the Cambridge Activity Code. So, for example, a student in another district may have some minor differences with their school district's activity code, and we always have to follow the most stringent rules. So some of our Cambridge rules may be more stringent than the WIAA rules, which may be different than a different school district. So each activity code is unique to its school district, but also has to follow the rules set out by the WIAA, which is our governing body. The first thing we would need to talk about is eligibility and how the activity code covers eligibility. And generally there's two parts of eligibility. The first one goes into academic eligibility, and we view our athletic programs and our activities programs as extensions of the classroom, where academics need to come first, they must come first, and if an athlete isn't doing well in the classroom, that we may need them to refocus in on their academics and not allow them to compete while they focus on their grades and are able to increase their grades, thus allowing them to continue on their graduation path. So generally when it comes to eligibility, we look at grades in terms of failing grades or incomplete grades. Generally with a failing grade, a student athlete would be on academic probation. If they ended up with 2 failing grades, they would be academically ineligible. Generally, if an athlete is on probation, they are still able to practice and compete, but what happens is if they are not able to increase their grade by the next grading period, then they may become academically ineligible. Academic ineligibility means that a student athlete is still on the team, they still go to practice, we really want to encourage them to do that, but they are unable to compete during the competitions during that eligibility time or ineligibility time. Generally, our grading windows are every 4 to 5 weeks. We have midterm grades, we have quarter grades, and semester grades, and so all of those grading windows then reflect eligibility. And so students at a quarter may move from probation to ineligible, from ineligible to active, or from active to probation as a variety of eligibility status. We also allow dual sport participation. A student athlete may choose to be involved in multiple sports during a season. We just ask that when that student athlete has chosen that they let their coaches know. The coaches in turn let the athletic director know, and then we'll arrange a meeting to talk about practices, schedules, transportation, a variety of details that are going to affect that dual sport participation. We also want to make sure that student athlete has a positive experience in both programs, and that we're able to help facilitate that. We also want to make sure that a dual sport athlete is aware of the challenges, the logistical challenges of being involved in multiple sports. Generally, what we'll do is at the end of that meeting, we'll look at declaring a primary sport, so that way if there is a conflict, then the student athlete goes with that primary sport that was declared. Next, we want to look at attendance. Attendance is also an important part of academic, or I should say athletic eligibility. Athletic eligibility, we expect a student to be at school the day following the competition. Obviously, it may impact their grades if they're struggling to be at school, but we know it can be tough. It can be tough in a winter time when you're coming back late from a distant athletic competition, but we do expect you to be in school, and we do expect you to be here, and we're always reminding student athletes that they're students first and athletes second. So if there's an issue with attendance the day following a game, generally we'll meet with that student. We'll talk about what has happened, how many times that they've missed, and generally if they continue to miss school during that sports season, we may look at the activity code committee board hearing their case and listening to why they were gone, and providing some consequences for that particular season. We also look at transportation. Transportation is important. We do expect our student athletes to ride the bus to and from athletic events. If there are some that are here, generally we look at the golf course for the golf teams. We look at cross country and some of the Deerfield opportunities, some of the swimming opportunities where we may make some allowances for those student athletes to get to a practice or a contest. But we wouldn't allow a student athlete to drive themselves to an activity or to a contest. Generally, if there's a conflict or there's an issue, we would just ask the parents to let us know. We have a form we can fill out and complete, and let the coaches know. We also have a sign-out sheet. For example, if a student athlete was at a contest and they were going to go home with an aunt or an uncle or a relative was going to pick them up, we would have a liability sheet that they could sign off with the coach, and then they would be released to that parent's care. The next issue we want to look at is standards of conduct. And so these generally deal with behavioral issues or things that can happen outside of school that will affect a student's eligibility. Generally, we look at two types of categories with standards of conduct. We would look at a major code violation and a minor code violation. Generally, the major code violations are going to be more significant and carry more significant student discipline, and the minor can generally are fewer. Generally, it's like a game, can be more if there's a repeated pattern of behavior. With major violations, typically we look at AODA issues, which would stand for alcohol and drug abuse type of issues. It could be a severe ticket if a student athlete was misbehaving in the community and they were ticketed for something very serious. We would move them into a major activity code violation. We would look at drug, alcohol, and tobacco generally as our main category of major violations. If a student athlete is using those substances or has those substances on them, generally they would incur a major activity code violation. We would also look at misdemeanor or felony tickets if the behavior was severe enough from a police officer. We may look at issues in school if a student is having trouble in a classroom and is removed from class. We also are concerned about investigations and a student athlete that would lie or mislead the administration when it came to an activity code violation. Bullying, harassment, or hazing would also fall into the major activity code violation category. And then finally, if there were two minor violations of the same offense, we would bump it up then to a major activity code violation on the second offense. Minor code violations generally are behavioral. If a student athlete is swearing, using inappropriate behavior, misrepresenting the school, It could also be insubordination to staff, to teachers. Could be lack of respect, or if they're getting kicked out of class. Generally, those are going to be minor violations. We also look at our PBIS, which is our Positive Behavioral Intervention Support System. If a student has 2 office referrals, that can also be a minor violation. If a student is suspended in or out of school, that can be a minor violation. If a student is caught plagiarizing an assignment or cheating on a test, if they're not following rules, whether that's school rules or classroom rules. If they're ejected from a contest, generally that aligns with the WIAA policies. We look at attendance concerns, removal from class, inappropriate use of social media, inappropriate language, vandalism, or conduct unbecoming. If a student athlete incurs any of these penalties, we have a series of steps that occur if they have an activity code violation. Generally, the first step is going to be a first offense, and that's going to be about 40% of a season. It may be reduced to 20% of the season if they're honest during the investigation, they're truthful, and they meet with Mrs. Parker to come up with a treatment plan. If they are not truthful and we have to follow a police report for the behaviors and identify what happened, generally we're not going to allow them to have the opportunity to reduce that suspension. If we have a second code violation, generally that's going to be suspension for 100% of a season, and that may be reduced down to 50% of the season. A third offense is going to be 1 calendar year, and a fourth offense would be permanent ineligibility. We're also aware that a student may make a mistake, and so we have a self-referral clause where a student athlete may come in. They may have violated the code over the weekend, and they come in Monday and they feel very guilty about what they did, and they can come in and let Mr. Schneider or I know, or even Mr. Leadholm, and we will not give them the major violation, but we will look at a 1-game suspension. Now, with the self-referral, you can only use that once. If there's a repeated pattern of behavior, we're not going to give you that break that we would if it happens one time. We also aren't going to give you a break if you wait 2 weeks and you've participated in contests prior to letting us know. Generally, if a student athlete wants to self-refer, we need to have that done right away and very quickly after the behavior that took place.
And just to note, that was one of the minor revisions that we as a district did make to the activity code this year. It needs to be timely. It cannot be 2 to 3 weeks after a violation and then they've played and kids and parents and others know they've competed. So we did make that. That is a very common sense change that we made.
The next part we have too is we do have a unique circumstances clause. If there's some bizarre or unordinary event that takes place, we're also willing to look at that, and we have a code board committee that can hear those particular cases. Generally that's pretty rare that happens, but we do have that in our code for something that's very unique that can happen. Once a student athlete would finish their time as being suspended, we have a reinstatement policy, and generally with a reinstatement policy it's going to involve a couple things. First, they're going to have to apologize to their team if it was an in-season violation. We're also going to want to have them write a reflection based on why their behavior didn't fit the code, it doesn't help our school, and why they did what they did, and then ultimately why they won't do that again and what they learned from that mistake as a way to help them understand the effect that they had not only on themselves but on their team and their school. Next, we look at an appeal process. If something happens and you as a parent don't feel good about the outcome, we do have an appeal process. We need an appeal letter. Generally that's a written letter done and sent to us within 5 days of the discipline information. Generally what will happen there is that then we'll move into an activity code hearing, which goes before our activity code board, and that panel is a member of usually 4 or 5 teachers that are involved either in activities or athletics, and they'll hear the case. They don't have the opportunity to make a decision to adjust the discipline, but they can either uphold it or they can choose to repeal the decision. The final appeal process would be to Mr. Nicolay, and that would be within 5 days after the code board hearing, where the appeal would have to take place then to Mr. Nicolay. And then lastly, we do have guilt by association in our activity code, and that's important because if a student isn't necessarily misbehaving, but they're at a party where there's drugs, alcohol, tobacco, and they choose to stay and be involved in that, it's very difficult for us to figure out what has happened. And so we've decided that we're going to assume that they're guilty. Our recommendation for students and for parents is if a student goes to a place unbeknownst to them where there is something going on, once they realize what is happening, that they should leave immediately and they should get out of that situation. Generally, we'll give a student athlete some grace as long as we can find evidence that they did indeed leave and left immediately. If a student athlete stays for a couple hours, hangs out, but isn't participating in those things, likely that's still going to be a code violation for them. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you've identified some things you maybe didn't know about our activity code. We also want to remind you that we want kids to participate in athletics. We have a lot of successful programs here. We've done a lot of good things for kids. I think kids are really excited about our athletic and activity programs. But at the same time, we also have to hold them to a high standard and a high standard of conduct as they represent our school. Ultimately, once you're done with this video, we'd want you to sign the activity code. So that way we know that you've read it, you've seen it, to have your son or daughter sign it as well. And if you have any questions, please feel free to call me. My number is 423-3261, and I'm at extension 3130. You can also email me at mklingbeil, KLINGBEIL, at cambridge.k12.wi.us.
Well, thank you, Mr. Klingbeil, for outlining our activity code. We do require activity codes to be signed by all of our students at the beginning of each year, and we will be posting that on the Cambridge High School's website, and it will be found under the athletics page, under the quick links section for forms, for athletic forms. We will have copies in the office as well if you need those. So we hope that this has been informative to you as families. Please take a look at that document, go over it with your child or children, because we do have an expectation of all of our student athletes and those in clubs as well. And so if you have questions, please contact Mr. Klingbeil, or certainly contact myself or Mr. Leadholm. Thanks everyone for your time. We hope you've learned something, and have a great day, and go Blue Jays!